What the heck?
I don't know. It's still going. The music. It's stopless music.
It's because I had the LinkedIn page up. So hopefully anyone who's looking at this also knows that it's now running. So that's great. Hi, I'm Dean. Welcome again to Dr. V. And today, okay, so Dr. V, here's the thing about webinars, and you know this about me, that I did something like 200 plus webinars last year.
That's a
between
lot.
corporate clients and some of my own and so on. And I know more about webinars, the world's unsexiest topic. I know more about webinars and audience attention than maybe anybody. And there are recurring themes that we find in people who have trouble in creating a sort of B2B webinar that ultimately results in something like a meeting for sales, which is, I mean, why are you doing all this if sales is not going to talk to someone at some point? And so, I mean, nobody goes into these things trying to fail. Right? I mean, marketing wants a good turnout, and sales would like to have a prospect, not just a lead, because sales is never going to be able to follow up with every lead that marketing could ever give them, right? Mm-hmm. The subject matter expert, and I've been all of these people, by the way, in various corporate jobs over the many years. And I've been on the marketing side, been on the sales side, and been on the subject matter side. And like the subject expert, I mean, they just want the whole thing over with.
Right.
If they can get through this without, dying from embarrassment, that's fantastic. And what we end up with is that nobody's trying to fail, but there's really no coordination here. You get all of these sort of technical webinars or explainer webinars, and you have these 4 groups: marketing and usually the technology or the scientific or engineering type folks, and the sales folks, and the audience, because you almost never hear about the actual audience and what their experience is going to be. And I mean, to the audience, this is what the experience looks like, right? It's them. Marketing has arranged it for them. There's a subject matter expert who's going to talk. They probably don't even think about sales, but sales is way over on the tail end, about as far away conceptually from the audience as you can get. And honestly, in all the different ones that I do, including with clients, and then when I was working in corporate, it mostly looks like this.
Mm-hmm. They're all trying to kill each other.
Not all trying to kill each other, but the subject matter experts are really not like, they wish this whole thing would go away.
I see.
And marketing and sales are perpetually like, I don't want leads. I want prospects. And like, I can give you leads, and stop harassing me about what I can and can't do. I'm building awareness. And I mean, you have all of these people and all these groups, and, the audience, oh my God. Right?
I'm kind of glad
nobody knows
the subject matter
result with consistency, which is how to move the audience from one end to the other and get them in.
Gotcha. I'm glad the subject matter expert wasn't pointing the weapon at himself. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have these 4 groups, right? And sales is supposed to be the top beneficiary of the whole thing. And they actually have the least involvement usually in the creation of the webinar. And they might help a little bit with promotion. The least involvement, best potential upside, virtually no downside. I mean, no single person in sales is going to lose their job if a marketing webinar doesn't do well or produce any, prospects.
Right.
The subject matter expert, obviously, just kind of their definition of success in this is that they still have a job at the end of it. Because the thing about webinars is all mistakes are public. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it is not their real job, quote unquote, real job, to produce meetings for sales or even to help build awareness for the most part, unless they work in one of those special groups, like maybe there's a dedicated CTO group or maybe they're in sales engineering. Mm-hmm. And so, they're sort of in a customer facing role. But if they're like one of the senior technical folks, they're not in a customer facing role for the most part. This is not something they do. And it is not a definition of success in their job. They just kind of wish it was over with. At best, it's an obligation.
Right.
Right. And then marketing is sort of the platform and the middleman. It's very rare, working with enough clients now, it's very rare for a marketing department to have anyone on staff who knows how to work with public speakers and help the subject matter expert, deliver a great presentation or even create a great presentation. Mm-hmm. It's very rare for anyone in B2B marketing to have much understanding of audience attention during live events and what to do with it and how not to squander it and everything else. So it's a mess. Right? And then we have the poor audience member right? And here's the thing about the audience member. I'm going to talk about this in a second. They have a certain amount of attention that they'll give you at the top. And if you don't manage to say or do something interesting in the first several minutes, we'll get into it. All right. So I gave this talk to another group a few weeks ago. We call this the grandkids curse. So a lot of people can remember at some point their mother saying to them, I hope that when you have children, they act the same way you're acting now.
I was just thinking that the other day with my 15-year-old.
Yeah.
It's absolutely true.
So in the webinar world, there's an equivalent or a parallel to the grandkids curse. And it's this, it doesn't have a catchy name. That the way you act when you're in the audience is the same way that your audience will act when you're the presenter, right? Not because of the way you acted in some other presentation, but all the things you do during a presentation where, you sort of zone out, you check your email, you turn the webinar into sort of background noise or background radio, you leave the room, make a snack, go to the bathroom, whatever, right? Everyone assumes that when they're the presenter, the audience is staring at the screen intently at everything that they're doing and that they don't have to worry about audience attention. And yet when they're in the audience, they act exactly the way their own audiences do. It's a paradox for why people think that things are different when they're on one side of the camera versus the other. Why do audiences, by the way, register and attend? Over the years, like we ask a lot of people, right, after the fact. Over the years, we've gotten a lot of answers for this. These are not even the top 4. Although, I mean, the first one is probably the top 1, right? They're there for the content. They want to learn something without, a hard sell. And a B2B webinar is usually pretty good for that. There are lots of other reasons people register for a webinar and then attend a webinar. And a lot of them have nothing to do with your content. They just have other goals, and your webinar is sort of theirs. I mean, I'm not trying to make anyone depressed, but just understand that the grandkids curse works. And so it's important that we do everything we can to get and keep the audience attention for the people who are there for reason number 1. So how do we get here? Because ultimately what we want is we want a meeting for sales. We want sales to be busy. We want marketing to have the easiest possible job. We want the subject matter expert to feel like they totally crushed it. And we want the audience to be happy about it.
Yep.
Okay. So I don't talk about me much in these things. So just very, very, very briefly, I'm Dean, if you've never been on one of my sessions before, and I have written for or ghost written for or produced from end to end a lot of webinars. I've probably produced more webinars than you've attended in your career. And I've been either the writer or the ghost writer for a lot of different companies on every continent except Antarctica. Someone pointed out to me, Dr. V, on a YouTube comment last week, that technically, because since I have clients in Argentina and lots of other countries and write for them, that since Argentina lays claim to a small piece of Antarctica, I could technically, theoretically say that I have, had an Antarctican client. That's not a word.
Except that
but I'm sticking to the actual no. Just because one country makes a claim doesn't mean that it's a real thing.
No, you need a penguin performance to pull this off.
Exactly. I've written for a lot of companies. I've worked for a lot of companies, and I produce a lot of webinars.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not surprised at all that 99% of all the B2B or business webinars you've ever seen were kind of boring and kind of dull, right? Mm-hmm. They're not sexy. You rarely ever find a webinar specialist at a marketing company, in a marketing team at any company. Most of the subject matter experts don't do them often enough to become good at them and don't want to become good at them. I mean, it's like I had a buddy in the Army. He had just started working at a company we were at, and I was pretty young. And I asked him, I was like, what's the main lesson you took away from being in the Army? He says, Dean, never become good at something you don't like to do, because that's exactly what the Army will assign you to.
Boy, that sounds familiar. Like I was a straight A student in math, and I hated math.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, most of them, I mean, there's a lot of value in a webinar. And here's the thing. A webinar is one of the, especially if you make something complicated or you sell something complicated or what you do for your clients can be kind of complicated. A webinar, a live event where a human being who knows a lot about something bridges the gap between the technology or whatever the complicatedness is, bridges the gap between that and an interested audience that wants to know about it and it might solve their problem. Webinars are essentially unmatched for that, especially because they're so low pressure from a sales point of view. You would not want, if you were interested in some company's product, you would not want their salesperson to call you and rope you into a 45-minute presentation on what they do and how they make it and whatever. But you'll go to a webinar because it's very low pressure, it's very easy to deal with and so on. So for that, they are unmatched, which is why they keep being produced, even though most of them are really boring. And so just very quickly, the company I co-founded was bestdamwebinar.com, and bestdamwebinar.com produces webinars for clients of all different sizes. Some just have a few dozen people in them. Some have like 100,000 people in them. But the point of them is that we make a lot of these things. We study and iterate through on lessons to make sure that everybody's getting a better experience every time, especially the subject matter experts and especially the audience. One of the many, many things that we do, you're probably going to get an email. If you haven't got it already, you'll get it in a few minutes if you registered for this event. And if you didn't register for this event, just pause the video. This is like 15 or so, maybe 20 of about 50 different things that have to be done to produce a webinar that we'll do in some combination for clients. I'm not going to dwell on this. Okay, so back to here's where we are, and here's where we want to be. Now, the reason that even though they don't usually produce results, they can produce results often enough, and they're unmatched in their ability to do it. The reason we keep doing all of these webinars is because in any sort of selling situation, anyone in sales has probably seen these before in one way or another, in marketing too, as the 4 resistances, or sometimes called the 4 resistances to buying. And a webinar is it might be the only way, a mechanism that can actually address all 4 in one shot, which is why they're so powerful. Starting on the left, there's distrust of claims. You just don't believe what it is the company is telling you, you as a prospect, you as a potential customer. For the most part, that's marketing. We all know that marketing sort of inflates claims and says broad things and that kind of stuff. And sales too, of course, we distrust some of what sales says. Over on the inertia side, obviously, in a B2B context, in B2B, there is no scarcity. There's never scarcity. You can't get someone to buy usually, if it's a big deal and, they have to go through legal and procurement and whatever else. You can't get them to buy this month by giving them like a 10% discount. They'll call you 6 months from now and then ask for the 10% discount. And you'll give it to them because if you don't, they're going to go to your competitor. There's no scarcity in B2B. And so that also means that there's no... your biggest competitor in a lot of situations is just inertia, right? There's almost never anything so desperate that needs to be solved in a corporate environment that you can't defer the decision until tomorrow. And then tomorrow you defer it to the next day. And so audience and inertia for audiences is a big, big deal. Reactance, you may or may not know that word, but you've definitely experienced the phenomenon. Reactance is when you're talking to a salesperson, it's usually like a direct conversation. You're talking to a salesperson and they're trying to pin you down, right? They're trying to remove a lot of your options. Like, oh, well, if I could get 10% off, would you buy it today? That's like an example of the way you felt when I said that. That's reactance. It's like, wait, I had the whole universe of options open to me 5 seconds ago, and now you're trying to like put me in a box. And then, of course, there's scrutiny, which is you actually want to know, especially the bigger the deal is, or in a B2B kind of scenario. You want to know the details about stuff. You want to know that you're not going to regret the purchase. You want to know the answer to the safety question, which is the question on the top of this slide here. How do I know it's safe for me as an employee to vouch for you inside my company, to my manager, to the board, to the CEO, to the steering committee, to the leadership team, to legal, to procurement? How do I know I'm not going to be embarrassed because you don't actually have anything that you say you have? How do I know that this stuff actually works? How do I know that I'm not going to lose reputation points in here. It could derail my promotion track. I could lose my job.
Yeah,
So,
especially
no matter how
if
much,
you're,
no matter how much money you as a vendor might make your customers or save your customers, if I'm on the other side of that and I'm sort of the gatekeeper, one of the technical people, especially who's sort of vetting the various companies to see who's going to make it to the next round. I mean, none of you, no matter how much money is involved, none of you are worth my job. None of you say you can save the company $1 billion a year. It's not worth 100% of my income to do it.
Yeah.
And so webinars are fantastic because they can actually take care of a lot of this as the subject matter experts, if they understand and have a structure for how they put together their presentation, how they put together their talk. If they have a structure that addresses all the 4 resistances, you've got a powerhouse of an event that, with enough people in the audience or repeated enough times, you're going to generate, more and more meetings and turn leads into prospects. So we've got these 4 groups, marketing, sales, whatever. We got these 4 resistances. We've got one goal, which is to get a prospect into a meeting. And we've got, in my case, a 7-question structure that sort of holds all that weight. And today's structure doesn't. So here's today's structure. And honest to God, you could take this structure, roll it back 2,000, 3,000 years, go back to ancient Greece, go back to a village, in Asia or Africa. Like, the same structure will be used. Someone has to establish their bona fides because the customer is asking themselves, like, how do I know I can trust you? And how do I know, I can trust what you're showing me? And then once that level of sort of expertise and authenticity is done, then they just geek out on and just bury your attention in all the details. And then maybe there's a Q&A. Like, this hasn't changed in a bazillion years.
Would that be like in Rome, the chariot maker?
Yeah, you got it. Lend me your ears.
Okay.
Of course, none of this anticipated the issue around online events. And here's what I'm talking about here. So everyone watching this, whether it's live or a video or whatever, everyone has been in this situation where a basic assumption about an audience was true because you were sitting down in a live event, right? You were in a conference room, you were in an auditorium or whatever. You needed to go somewhere. You needed to answer a text message or a phone call or go to the bathroom or whatever. And so when everyone was present, you could assume as a speaker that once you started speaking, virtually no one was ever going to leave. They might be bored, but they weren't going to leave. And we all know what it feels like to sort of get up and be the only person who's standing up and sort of maybe work your way around the outskirts of the room. And then you got to push on for some inexplicable reason, the door weighs 10,000 pounds and you got to make this loud noise to push in on the bar in order to get it to open. And there's a huge clicking noise, right? And then you hold on to the door so that it closes really softly to try to avoid interrupting anybody. Everyone was looking at you, or maybe you felt like everyone. There's a lot of social pressure to just shut up and sit down in an interpersonal kind of event like that. None of that is true for webinars. And so all of this time where we've not had to worry about the audience attention too much, it's gone in an event like this. And this is pretty standard, breakdown of how audience attention will degrade over the course of a webinar, right? You got your high point, which is the kickoff and the first slide or two, sort of the intro. And then, especially if someone is dumb enough to go to like a housekeeping phase, we'll talk about that in a second. Like, the audience attention degrades there. It probably usually jumps up a bit when the actual content starts. And then it just degrades over time until it's all the way out. And if anyone's thinking that this presentation is me giving tips and tricks about things like, hey, have a poll or like do a chat storm or whatever, like, these are all stupid, right? You might get a tiny spike. You might get a big spike in audience engagement, but it disappears as fast as it comes. It's a software problem to an emotion. It's a software solution to an emotional problem. And those don't work.
Because you have engaged their emotions.
Yeah, all you've done is sort of distracted them for a tiny bit. So the new style, obviously, there's still once you start the Q&A, it's inevitable that you will have a degradation in audience attention. Once people sort of understand, for most people in an audience, every webinar breaks down into 3 sections. There's the sort of getting started. Then there's the main content, which is when they have the highest level of attention usually. And then once their part of the webinar is over, which is to say, like the part, the topic, the title that they showed up for. Once that's there, it's inevitable that people will start to drop out of the session. Now, we do have some techniques that we use to try to keep as many of those people in the Q&A session as possible. One example is a scary question. The very first question that ever gets asked in a Q&A, we usually create it for a client. And we basically, I go to them and I say, go to your top salesperson or your newest salesperson and ask them, what's the one question that they dread a customer is going to ask them? And it's a question like, well, I just read that your competition came out with this new product that seems way better than yours, or like something you would never want to be surprised by. I said, that's your first Q&A question. We'll let the audience ask all the rest, but that's your first one. And the reason we do it is as people start winding down or mentally checking out on a Q&A, if a question is intriguing or scary enough, they'll stay just to see how you answer. And if you can keep them for the first question, you can probably keep them for the one or two of the rest of the questions. We've got like 10,000 of these things that are in a course that we're making now. It's not available now. You can't buy it now, but all of these things in a course to help people have these better, more productive, more useful webinars. Okay. Good. So again, old structure, didn't accomplish much. Not a surprise. New structure. And by the way, look at the green part. Like the green part, that question, by the way, these are all questions that the audience members ask themselves. You're not asking these questions of the audience, and you don't have a slide that says, what is that? But look at the green section. This is where the subject matter expert gets to totally geek out on features and functions and benefits and so on. Notice that it's not particularly shorter. It's a little bit shorter, but it's not particularly shorter than the old style. So they still get to geek out for most of the presentation, but we need to frame it up first. And so, again, you should probably already have these slides, excuse me, or a link to them in your email if you register for the event. But it's bad form to read what's on a slide, but I am going to read what's on this slide because most people have not seen these before. In fact, we've had various models of this. This is the 2023 model for the 7. It used to be like 10 or 11 or 12 questions. Now it's down to 7, and like sometimes the order changes a tiny bit. And so you want to open with sort of what is that, which is what we call the gap. So we don't recommend that you ask a question. We don't recommend that you start with a bunch of boring stuff at the beginning. The audience sort of needs to see something on screen or hear about something and say, oh yeah, well, wait, that's broken. What do you mean it's broken? Right? I'm gonna go over some of these techniques in a second. And then the next one is, how do I know I can trust you? And that's been around ever since like Roman and Greek times and, tiny villages on every continent ever. And then what's in it for us? This is benefits, not features. So I tell the subject matter experts, and I was a software developer for a long time, and I was a software project manager for a very, very long time. This is not how we do it. This is just why they would be in a positive future if they stick around or if they actually bought what the company sells. Positive future as opposed to a negative present. If the present wasn't negative, there's no problem to solve. So why are you watching a webinar anyway? And the positive future is where you want to go. And then the next section, which most subject matter experts have never addressed in any presentation they've ever given, is what's kept us, or what's kept me, what's kept my company as a prospect, what's kept us from getting what we want, and how will this help us get what we want? Also, sort of the caveat in there is it's never their fault, no matter even if it is their fault. It's True. Never their fault
Classic.
That they're in the negative present that they're in.
Yeah.
Or at least it's not completely their fault. There has to be something that was out of their control. You're going to talk about that so that they'll stick around. Because if you just tell them it's their fault, it's like, well, whatever, I'm out of here. And they're gone.
There's no hope.
Right? So then section 5, how does it work? This is your geek out section. Then you sort of, you wind that down and roll into why now? And why now is the absolute hardest question to answer in any B2B presentation. Like I said, there is no scarcity in B2B. It's very hard. Honestly, if a customer came to me and said, hey, we can do every section here, you get to pick whichever one you want to do, I would focus, for their benefit, I would focus on why now.
Huh.
Because, it's how does it work is not even as important as why now.
Huh.
Because why now is so hard to answer in B2B.
Yeah. If you don't have scarcity, then can you still imply urgency, like your competition's going to do this?
Yeah. There's a few different ways that we approach it.
Okay.
But why now is by far the toughest question. Nobody in sales ever wants to have to answer why now, because the answers never seem compelling.
Gotcha.
Right? It's very there. I mean, we use writers to come up with this because it's really hard to do and still stand out relative to your competition. And and then what's the risk of doing nothing? Basically, like there's a negative future if you just stick around and don't move on this. And then, of course, what's the next step? Like, what's an actual call to action? And the call to action needs to be very clear and very easy. It needs to be a baby step. It needs to be, you can shoot for the moon and say, click here to like book a demo with sales. But even that's kind of it's not a rope bridge, as we call it, right? A rope bridge is something that gets you from where you are to the next place. It doesn't carry a lot of weight. So be very thoughtful about what you're trying to haul across with you. And book a meeting with sales right now is usually a big ask. That's a heavy weight. Whereas, watch a video or grab just 15 minutes, like a very time constrained event, and ask whatever questions you want to ask, and we'll just listen, and do what we can. That's a lot lighter than say, here, talk to our salespeople.
So would download our white paper be in this, or is it too?
Yeah, it's exactly right. One of those, or read our blog posts, right?
Okay, gotcha.
Right. Those are on the low end. Subscribe to our newsletter, right? It's a rope bridge. The point is you need to like start and continue a conversation to get someone into a meeting. Okay. And then what you'll notice is what's the next step, and the Q&A are concurrent. And we'll talk about that in a second. All right. Now, if those are the questions the audience is asking themselves as, sort of mentally they're ruminating on as you go through your structure, what should they think at the end of each one of those sections before you move into the next, right? And so, the main one, the main question, the main impression you want to leave them with is, this thing is complicated, but these guys have already done all the thinking and all the work on it.
So like no heavy lifting.
They've been transparent. Yeah. They've shown me what it is. I'm just going to give them money so I can shortcut myself to a positive future. That's what you're aiming for. In fact, Section 5 is the only section where, if I have any input in it, it's the only section where I let a customer show something complicated. Usually, ideally, just one slide. I say, what's your most complicated looking slide with the most things on it? A complicated workflow or project plan, whatever. Like, show me the most complicated thing and show that to the audience, because ideally they will be slightly overwhelmed with the concept and the possibility of building it themselves. And so they think to themselves, oh, that is complicated, but these guys have already done all the thinking and all the work on it. And you can see the second question in white there. This person will know how to resolve this problem, and it works for other companies. That's one of the ways you're answering the safety question, is showing other companies that you've sold it to. And if you read these from left to right, and I'm not going to read them from left to right, you see that you're basically taking the customer from a, whoa, what is going on there? Oh, okay, got it. Oh, ooh, that is big, but really interesting stuff. Oh, yeah, well, we don't want to sit on that too long. Okay, I don't like feeling the way I'm feeling. I will take the next step. Another way to think about that is someone like me would do something like that. It's an old, I think, Seth Godin kind of thing.
I like those 30-second sales completions.
So let's go back to the very first one, because we don't possibly have time to go through all of the many
permutations,
techniques for dealing with all of the various problems that you end up in one of these things. But how to open matters. The gap, you create a gap, and you never ask a question, by the way. One of the things that I talked about in the group of professional speakers that I went over this with a while ago. If you're on stage in front of an audience, I guess you can ask a question. A lot of professional speakers like to open with a question and then, give their speech. You never open with a question on a webinar, especially a B2B webinar, because as soon as if any portion of the audience that feels they know the answer to the question, their attention craters.
Interesting.
So, yeah, anytime the audience thinks, and this is, one of the main lessons, anytime the audience thinks they know what's coming next, their attention just falls away. And it's very hard to get it back.
Yeah.
So a gap is where you need to create some kind of dissonance between what the audience believes or knows today and what's really true. Let's take just 1 second and talk about courtesy attention. Courtesy attention is no one knows how long it is. It depends on the person. Between 1 and 5 minutes usually. It's the attention that someone will give you at the top of a speech, like at the very beginning. What they're trying to do, unconsciously or consciously, they're trying to decide if you're worth the time investment or attention investment or emotional investment to stick around for the whole thing. And because it's the only attention that's focused that you get for free, I whenever possible, forbid clients to waste it on things like showing an agenda, or not for these kind of webinars. I mean, ironically, the webinars that you get where you should show an agenda and no one ever does it is interviews. If you're doing an interview style one, an agenda is fantastic, because customers will think that, okay, this is an interview. I don't actually know where it's going to go. If the first question is not interesting to me, I'm less likely to stick around for the second. If the second one's not interesting to me, I'm probably not going to stick around for the third, and so on, right? Whereas if you showed, I've got some questions very quickly, I'm going to ask you about blah and blah and blah and blah and blah and blah. Let's get into it, right? Then if there's anything in that list, short list of like 3, 5, 7 at the max questions, and I hear something as an audience member that, like, I want to know the answer to that, then you've probably got me for the whole thing.
Would you ever throw that up on a screen?
No one ever does an agenda for interviews, and it's silly.
Would you ever throw that up on a screen? Oh, somebody.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Oh, we have Michelle says, thank you. She says, I hate agenda slides. Oops,
yeah.
I was the one who was asking about an agenda
Never
slide.
Use an agenda slide for a straightforward presentation ever. But also, enough with the effing housekeeping instructions. Right. It's 2023. Right. Everyone knows how to type something in a chat box. Shut up. No. Anyone who doesn't know how to ask a question or use a chat box or adjust the volume or whatever in their webinar, you don't ever need to worry about them buying from you. They're too dumb to buy from you.
They don't know how to click.
They'll never. No. I mean, that's saying that they're too dumb is uncharitable. But I mean, in businessy terms, they will never. They'll never get a satisfactory answer to the safety question.
Got it.
Because if they can't even understand how to use the chat, they're definitely never going to feel safe about it, recommending you to their manager.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's bad luck for you. Bad luck for them, kind of. Bad luck for their company, but it is what it is. No housekeeping instructions. No agenda slide. You start with a gap. Now, what the hell is a gap? Here's some examples. You just change milk to whatever it is that you use, right? They said X was good for us. Turns out it never was. Yeah. Or X is good for us, but that has recently changed or is about to change. So you need to get ahead of the curve. You're going to be left out. Musical chairs kind of thing. Or X is great for most people, but not for people with green eyes, right? You're special, in other words. You're part of a group that should not be following along with what the majority of people do. Now, these are all sort of conceptual. So I made up a couple of products called XB19 and YC20, totally fake. And for each of the 3 that I just said, this is examples of them as if you were manufacturing paint.
Right.
And so, again, something was always true or something's accepted. Turns out that's kind of a myth. Or something, was legitimately great, but you shouldn't be using it anymore. Or something is legitimately great, but not for you. You're special in some way. Right? So you open with a gap. By the way, like I said before, you'll get an email if you register for this. So I'm not going to keep this on screen very long. And then if you're watching on a video, you can just pause it. But in case you're wondering, the gap for this talk was this, right? Here's something that you've accepted all along, but it was never working. And so now I'm going to explain why it didn't work. And then I'm going to explain how to get out of it. I'm going to resolve the gap. So the question is, like, how's he going to fix that? Well, that's how you fix that. Right. So what's an example here? I opened with the gap and then talked about experience with webinars and then the benefits of getting this right, especially if your competitors don't get this right. And then, it's not your fault. This is an old format that we've all used for a long time. You didn't even know there was a new structure. There is a new structure now. Here's the mechanics of the new structure. And then talking about the gaps and stuff. So I know it's kind of meta, but it's basically how we're doing it. Okay, so just we're hitting we're a little bit past our 30 minutes. So like the lockdown was awesome for people with this skill set. Okay, every sales meeting and every company had to move online. Like live video used to be rare. I remember a year into lockdown, I was watching some sci-fi series with Hilary Swank in it, and all of their communication was through a video screen. And I thought to myself, you know what? Even 5 years ago, that would have looked kind of futuristic. And now it's just Tuesday.
It's
for all of
Tuesday.
us.
Well, it is Wednesday.
And so like live video was rare and now it's expected, and most
Yeah.
of it is still so awful, right? But if you
Yeah.
do it right, and if you knock out that safety question and get
Yeah.
their attention and follow a good structure,
Mhm.
then the vendor who does that ends up getting the meetings. It's about as simple as that, right? The bar was raised when we were all flooded with live video, and then everyone realized, wow, it's not just me. Everyone sucks at this. And then it's like, okay, how do we not suck at this? Because, I saw a study from, I think it was McKinsey or Boston Consulting Group, where even today, now, like long past lockdown, most customers prefer sales meetings to be done online. Partly for a lot of the reasons we talked about here, right? Like it's very
hard
easy
to
to get
kick
out
them
of them.
Yeah.
Salespeople don't know that you're not paying attention or looking at the screen. You turn off your camera, whatever, right? They prefer that overwhelmingly, and probably always will from now on. It's also a lot cheaper for everybody, right? You don't have to have everyone in one location. You don't have to fly in salespeople. It's not like the company was paying to fly in salespeople to talk to them, but the salespeople's company was paying to fly them all in and so on. And so, for some kinds of salespeople, this was awful. And for other kinds of salespeople, they're rocking and rolling. They're having more meetings and talking to more people every day than they could have ever done when it was all done in person.
True.
Okay, so I'm cluing up here. If you're interested in this, please go visit our website. Now, normally, by the way, visit our website is the worst and weak kind of call to action. I don't actually recommend anyone do that.
But you did it.
Ideally, you'll go ahead and you'll just like take a few minutes. You're free to ask any questions you want. I'll stay on as long as anyone wants to. I cleared the next hour just in case. Worst case scenario, Dr. V and I, when this shuts down, we'll go over some like business items we need to get off our calendar. But go ahead and if you use that link, you can go ahead and book 15 minutes. It's just a 15-minute meeting. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about your own webinars. We'll just have a little chat. It's fun.
And I love the calendly.com/ZFO/webinar.
There you go. Nice and short, right?
Yeah. Hey, Michelle made a comment earlier when we were talking about the housekeeping and everything. She says, I usually log on to a webinar and go make a snack while they do the awkward instructions for 15 minutes.
They wasted Michelle's attention.
Sorry. I hope we didn't waste your attention, Michelle. But I haven't seen any questions pop in. Just
go grab 15
comments.
minutes. And if you're watching this on video, the link will still work. Go grab 15 minutes. Webinars are not producing meetings.
Oh, she says, I'd like to offer. Oh, here we go. She says, I'd like to offer a 15-minute webinar. Does the length matter, or can I just last as long as it needs to take? That's a great question.
Okay, so I do get asked about this a lot. Yeah, so the shorter, the better. Understanding that you're going to have to most likely compress the how does it work part.
Yeah.
Right. If the goal is still to get someone to take a step and get on your calendar or so on, then like 15 minutes is really the minimum. 30 is pretty good. Most people don't want to sign up for an hour anymore. The reason they don't want to sign up for an hour is they've been trained accidentally for a decade or more that it's going to be mostly wasted time.
Right.
And so a 30-minute one, I mean, it's hard to waste too much time in a 30-minute one.
Right. I can do it though.
And then you had a question, Dr. V, yourself, because you wanted to know about the footer. Oh yeah,
the footer. So you have different colors.
Yeah, you'll notice this is basically because the people who get a copy of these slides.
That's great.
Right, and use it as almost a booklet. The footer changes color.
Ooh.
The reason it changes color is because the color of the footer in the lower left, where it says bestdamwebinar.com, corresponds to which section of the structure I'm currently dealing with on that slide.
That's great. I'm glad that your name, Dean Wayne, doesn't cover that footer, because I know.
There you go. Yeah. So, I mean, green for how does it work? We're still in the how does it work? This is like, it's not your fault. What's in it for us? And so on, all the way back to the white ones in the opening.
I got to say, I'm a fan of the colors. That's a nice little touch.
Yeah. What's a good one to linger on? Oh, by the way, we call this the linger slide.
Yeah, but that pomegranate looks pretty faint. I
Yeah.
will tell you. That's just looking like it. Oh, here's someone else saying, I saw a guy do a 7-minute consults. Yeah, and said it worked awesome. So I'm wondering if a 7-minute webinar could grab attention. You know what? I actually, my partner, well, John is often in here too. And so my
Right.
business partner, I partner with Dean periodically. There's a company that I did a commercial for, from production to voiceover, called 6-Minute Webinar. Now they maintain you can, but I tend to agree with Dean that it takes a little bit longer. She says, providing I knock it out of the park with information, a killer CTA.
Right.
Is it a dumb idea or crazy enough to make it work?
So here's the difference between this, right?
Yeah.
So it's the difference between a webinar and what's known in marketing as a video sales letter.
A VSL, yeah.
So if you mean a 6 or 7 minute thing and it's like pre-recorded, you can get a lot done in a scripted, pre-recorded event. And so if basically it's a video that plays, and how you deliver the video, it's usually like a dedicated landing page or web page, and the customer's kind of locked in. A lot of times they take away the video controls, so people can't, like, other than leaving the page, they can't speed it up or rewind it or whatever. Right. So if that's what you're talking about, and it's a video sales letter, it's a different animal, and it does work quite well, although it tends to work for B2C more than B2B. And if you're thinking, oh no, I sell to businesses, so it's B2B. Here's the difference in this world for B2B and B2C. If one person can make the purchase decision, it doesn't matter if they're a consumer or the owner of a business, or if one person can pull out a credit card or make a phone call and get the purchase done, then it's still a B2C sale. It's a B2B sale if it takes multiple people. So it's not just you or your manager. Like the CEO has to go to the board, or someone has to clear it with legal or procurement or whatever, right? Tech usually has, normally, like, the people who are on webinars tend not to be the last decision makers.
Right.
They tend to be the senior technical people. The senior technical people, for the most part, can never say yes. They can only say no. So they have a veto very often, but they don't have budget. Like, they can't buy it themselves.
So, but if you had a small business, let's say it's a startup or something like that, and maybe they have 5 to 10 employees, and the big kahuna's on the webinar, that's not an issue. So I guess it's about a question of scale of the company.
But it's still a B2C sale if that person doesn't need permission or buy-in from anyone else to make the purchase.
Very interesting. So in that case,
VSLs can work very well in B2C. The more closer to sort of enterprise sales that you get, or longer term engagements, then, where, like, different people will have to buy in on you as the vendor, then that's a B2B sale. And so it's hard to imagine a 7-minute anything or 6-minute anything B2C oriented working in that case, because it's not long enough with enough detail to answer the number one question. I mean, in B2C, the number one audience question, the hurdle you have to clear is, how do I know I won't regret making this purchase? Different question than, how do I know it's safe for me to vouch for you here at my company?
Yeah. So now I'm realizing that the 6-minute webinar, the 7-minute webinar is really the VSL.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. Well, hopefully that was helpful in terms of answering your question.
Yeah. All right. So I think we're done, right?
Yeah. We can stick a fork in it.
Anyone who registered, like I said, should have an email with the slides and stuff. Anyone who wants to talk about anything, I'm always open to have a quick chat with somebody. Just use the link at the top of the page here. And otherwise, that's it for me.
All right.
Bye.
We're out of here.